Love is the strongest feeling and the deepest need of all living things. And love surely knows no age. For thousands of years it caused tempers, wars began, rulers were overthrown, states and cities collapsed, tribes and clans feuded. But love also brings life and belief in a miracle. It gives wings to heroic exploits. Poets, artists, and musicians dedicate their verbose poems, beautiful paintings, and divine melodies to love. Orpheus and Eurydice, Romeo and Juliet, Kozy Korpesh and Bayan Sulu. Their stories will not leave anyone indifferent. But let's go back from myth and legends to our mortal realm. We're going to look behind the yurt's kerege. Let's try to find out what is love for nomads. Does beating actually mean loving? Let's say that in every Kazakh house there should be a whip. Ask why there's a whip in the Kazakh house. Were Kazakh brides really free? In regard to property, a woman was very dependent. She came into someone else's family and had absolutely no property. The secret meaning of Kazakh games. Well, imagine what kind of physical contact it was, yes, when you touched each other with your feet, yes, and looked into each other's eyes, and you also swayed. Centuries ago, people who lived on this land created some fascinating images on rocks. Hunting scenes, sun-headed deities, totem animals, and warriors with swords and arrows. We can also find some scenes of erotic content, as we may call it now. For ancient tribes that lived here on the modern territory of Kazakhstan, this concept was sacred and closely associated with fertility cults and the eternal life itself, the renewal of it. And up until now, Kazakh people have preserved a special reverent attitude to love and reproduction. Today, Searching for Mystery, and me, Daniel Besedin, and you guys will try to find out what romantic relationships look like in a traditional nomadic society. To understand this question better, our crew met with reputable Kazakh scientists, a historian, an ethnographer, a culturologist, and a linguist.
Тема эта действительно интересная, и не очень хорошо изученная в этнологической науке.
This topic is really interesting, and it's not well studied in ethnological science. Our ethnologists and ethnographers always put the main emphasis on the economy, spiritual culture, and traditions of the Kazakh society. And this side of the life of Kazakh people received little attention.
Любовь кочевников пылкая.
The love of nomads is fervent, faithful, passionate, and tranquil. It's diverse, it runs the gamut.
Конечно, сейчас вот есть историки и, в общем-то, культурологи, которые хотят представить.
You know, there are some modern historians and, well, culturologists who want to portray our ancestors as some kind of celestial creatures who probably didn't even believe themselves, as if they had no strong feelings and desires. But of course, it's not true.
Бетін жабатыны бар. Паранжамен. Қазақтарда ол жоқ, қырғыздарда ол жоқ. Неге?
Women and girls in Central Asia usually cover their faces with a burqa. Kazakh and Kyrgyz people don't have this tradition. Our girls and women never covered their faces. Kazakh people have always been bellicose. They spend life in clashes and battles. However, people cannot live without love. That's life. According to experts, the nomadic Kazakh culture was originally based on ancient traditions and customs of the Tengrian worldview. Over time, the traditional Kazakh law adat was added to it. And later on, Kazakh life and love began to be regulated by Sharia law. And it's truly a unique situation. I have never seen such a mixture of different views on gender relations anywhere else. Research claims that because of this diversity, a very special lifestyle had developed in the Kazakh steppes, where a woman could pick up a bow and arrows and fight the enemy side by side with men. She was also able to express her opinion openly and boldly in musical duels known as aitis. She was a friend and a wise advisor for her husband, despite the fact that her spouse was usually selected by parents for the good of the family or for economic reasons in accordance with the norms of Adat and Sharia, says Aksunkar Abdulina, a leading researcher at Shakan Walihanoff Institute of History and Ethnology.
Молодые люди, да, они были не свободны. Дети считались в казахском традиционном обществе собственными.
Young people were not free. In a traditional Kazakh society, children were considered to be the property of their parents. Therefore, they were not free to choose their future life partners. Their parents chose future spouses for them for their own reasons, based on maybe from some obligations that they were bound by.
Если говорить о свободе женщин,
If we talk about the freedom of a woman in a traditional society, then this freedom was totally conditional. Women still depended on the traditions of the society. If we compare them with the settled people of Central Asia, for instance, with the Uzbeks, they had Sharia law, which was more important than Adat, yes. And as they didn't lead a nomadic lifestyle, the Islamic prescriptions were more strictly observed. Why were women more free among our people? This was due to the social and economic reasons, and well, the nomadic lifestyle.
способом существования.
You know, it's kind of a paradox. I mean, Kazakh poems, epic legends, folk songs express a completely different view. They all have a similar plot. Lovers go against public rules, against the will of their families. I mean, they defy the traditions of the land. And there's some beauty, I would even say a glory, in this bound to fail challenge.
Kız Jibek, Kozy Korpesh, and Bayan Sulu, Enlik, Quebec, Kalkaman Mamır, these epic poems have one common feature, a tragic ending. For free love and freedom of choice, star-crossed lovers must pay the highest price, their own lives. Here is what culturologist Pirdali Ospan says about it.
Қалқаман мамыр деген жыр бар, поэма. Сонда
Kalkaman Mamır is a poem based on real events. This is the love story of a guy named Kalkaman and a girl named Mamır. They were blood relatives. Kazakhs usually didn't give their daughters permission to marry young men from the same clan. A couple had to have no common relatives for 7 generations or more. In the story, Kalkaman captured Mamır's heart, and they became a couple to the dismay of their family's elders. According to the laws at that time, tied up incestuous lovers were to be bound to the tail of a galloping horse. Kalkaman and Mamır managed to escape. Soon afterwards, she gave birth to their child. Mamır decided to return to her village, hoping that her mother and father had forgiven her.
But in her native village, death was waiting for Mamır at the hands of her own brother, Kokenay. And her beloved Kalkaman had to pass a tough test to save his own life.
содан соң екі жақ жауласып кететін болғандықтан ақсал қалдар айтады.
A feud broke out between the two families, and the elders decided to put an end to it in an unconventional way.
Атқа мініп шауып өссін.
Kalkaman had to ride on a horse in front of Kokenay. The elders said if Kokenay's arrow struck him, then the feud could end.
Сұрауы жоқ, сонымен дау бітеді дейді. Ал сол
However, not a single arrow hit Kalkaman, and he survived. And there were many such stories. Love is a very strong feeling.
жағдайлар өте көп. Ғашықтық сезімі өте күшті сезім.
Если мы спустимся немножко с такой патетики на более...
Well, let's get back from lofty thoughts to actual things. If we talk about everyday culture, then we should put aside the topic of love somehow and discuss the peculiarities of the family structure among Kazakh people and nomads in general.
В особенностях семейного уклада у казахов и у кочевников вообще.
Yofrat Imambek, UNESCO expert on intangible cultural heritage, candidate of sciences and social anthropologist, points out that a woman in the nomadic culture of the Kazakhs, in spite of all the facets of traditional marriage, wasn't a helpless and oppressed person. She not only had a special role, freedom of opinion, and respect from her family and clan.
И невеста, и жена занимают принципиально разные места.
Both a bride and a wife have a fundamentally different place in nomadic culture and in settled agricultural civilizations. The fact is that in nomadic cattle-breeding cultures, a spouse was a life partner, a confidante, a companion.
Жизнь – это наперсница, это партнер. Вот эти партнерские отношения.
This type of partnership was much more clearly enshrined in nomadic rituals and laws.
И в праве у кочевников.
The attitude toward girls in the nomadic culture was just as respectful, says Kanat Tasibekov, writer, author of the Situational Kazakh, Teach Yourself book, expert on national tradition.
Как бы вот в степи было такое равное отношение к женщинам. Вот, это...
Well, in the steppe, there was an equal attitude towards women, just like that. They were absolutely equal individuals. Of course, spouses wanted a boy as a successor to the family. This is understandable. Only boys were recorded in the chronicles called Jejere. The clan membership is inherited only through the male line. But what about daughters? Well, from pre-Islamic history, we can say that Arabs even buried girls alive sometimes. Well, that's how they treated girls. That is, boys were valued so much more. Kazakh people say,
Пол – это сенің ұрпағың.
a boy is your successor, a girl is just a guest in your house. That's what they thought. Well, even now, when you talk about the history and mention that girls were considered to be guests in the house, everyone gets the impression that it was some kind of dark Middle Ages, that the girls among the Kazakhs were downtrodden creatures. And in modern society, we see a sharp distinction and totally Puritan customs and traditions that are absolutely alien to the Kazakhs, and some people are still trying to instill them.
Now, it paid off for the family to raise an intelligent and beautiful daughter. Let's keep in mind that it was a custom to make some sort of payment called kalim for a bride. It would usually include gifts, jewelry, silverware, and most importantly, cattle. Now, eventually, even the poorest groom had to bring at least 17 horses to the bride's village. The average amount, according to historians, was 47 heads. Now, of course, the rich suitors spared no expense. They would give hundreds and hundreds of horses, cows, or sheep. All that would become a property of the bride's village.
Но говорить о какой-то такой абсолютной...
But we wouldn't claim that women had any kind of absolute freedom. It was out of the question, because in regard to property, a woman was very dependent. Well, even the dowry given to a woman before the wedding didn't belong to her anymore. She came into someone else's family and had absolutely no property. Well, how can a person be free without any possessions? For centuries in the traditional culture of Kazakh people, mutually exclusive customs and traditions surprisingly managed to coexist in an inexplicable way. On the other hand, the norms and laws of the Adat steppe law and Sharia imposed quite strict rules and restrictions on lovers and on spouses. But on the other hand, young guys and girls allowed themselves to engage in many premarital liberties dating from the times of Tengrian beliefs. This is especially evident in national games and folk funds. For example, Altı Bakan, few people know that this is not just a swing, but a whole challenge for lovers.
Вы знаете, бахан – это вот шест,
You know, a bakan is a pole on which shanarak is raised. Bakan is also a sacred object that is passed down from generation to generation. So bakan is just a couple of three tied poles. Yes, there's a rope on them and that's it. There's nothing else. Try it yourself. So about the tradition of swinging at the bakan, a guy and a girl rested their heels and feet against each other. That is, they had to hold on and cling down there. And then they started to swing. Well, first of all, it's very difficult. This action requires coordination, requires understanding. Well, its sacred meaning is in how it works out for a couple, who can endure it longer, who has stronger legs. Well, imagine what kind of physical contact it was when you touch each other's with your feet and looked into each other's eyes, and you also swayed. This was some sort of love. You almost flew and the movements had its distinct rhythm. And so I think it immediately became clear who would succeed and who would not as a family.
И вот тут я думаю, что здесь сразу становится понятно, у кого получится, у кого не получится семейная жизнь.
Kazakh people had and still have other entertainment, not less interesting. These are the equestrian games Audaraspak and Kızku. Girls competed on a par with boys. Audaraspak is one of the types of wrestling, where the winner is the one who throws the opponent off the horse and then puts flat on his back. For couples in love, it was also a way to get closer, to get to know each other better, to manifest their heart inclinations. And most importantly, it was impossible for mere spectators to tell the true feelings of the participants.
Мәселен, қыз қуу деген ойын бар. Қыз қуғанда жігіт.
For example, there's an equestrian game called Kızku. According to the rules of the game, a guy and a girl ride on horses. The young man chases the girl, and if he catches her up, he kisses her. In the second half of the game, it's exact opposite. The girl tries to catch her partner, and if she succeeds, she hit him with a whip. Of course, the girls didn't whip their sweethearts furiously. This was also a kind of flirting. Young people express their feelings with the help of games and competitions.
Осындай ойындар арқылы бір-біріне көңілін білдіреді.
Young people organize their own functions, or as we call it today, house parties.
Есть обычай такой, называется бастанга. Бастанга – это когда родители
There's a custom called Bestanga.
уезжают куда-то.
Bestanga is when the girl's parents left somewhere for a long time. Let's say they went to someone's funeral. Distances were great, so they left. So they would be back only in a week, let's say. There was a custom. The youth of the village gathered in that girl's yurt, in her house. The guys slaughtered a sheep or lamb, and the girls cooked that meat. They drank kumis and had singing contests without adults. Well, of course, it was all under supervision of all the sisters-in-law. They kept their eye on everything. There was some flirting and some maybe kisses and so on. You never know. Let's take, for instance, games. There's a popular game called Aksuyek. What is it? How is it played? Well, on a moonlit night, the players went out to the steppe and the pitcher threw a bone as far as he could. It could be a mutton, shoulder, blade, or a talus of cattle. I mean, it's a knuckle bone.
Альчик.
Біреу ақсүйекті лақтырады, сүйекті. Содан соң
During the game of Aksuyek, one of the participants threw a bone, but no one could see where. Then everyone started looking for it. This game made it possible for couples in love to withdraw to be together. However, the girls' parents never sent them alone to such games. The girls were accompanied by chaperones from their close circle, for example, the sisters-in-law. After all, lovers could give in to their feelings and forget about boundaries. Since those times, the saying goes, a sister-in-law is like a feather for a girl. Not only did they accompany and care for their younger words, but they also helped lovers to find happiness. For example, they handed notes and conveyed greetings. Another curious episode left its mark in the history of nomadic life and folk funds. It took place 100 years ago when Nikolai Khludov, a well-known artist for the Trans-Ili region, presented one of his paintings to the public. The canvas depicted half-naked women with their hands tied behind their backs, trying to unfetter the camel. The first of them who would succeed in completing that, frankly, non-trivial work would take an expensive animal as a prize. Imagine the public outrage. People slammed the artist, claiming that the Kazakhs had never organized such competitions, and the whole scene was unthinkable. In modern terms, this was a real disgrace. There was a game called Tuye Shishu, or Uyalmas. Tuye Shishu means unfettering a camel, while Almas means a shameless one. If I'm not mistaken, the last time such game was held was at a dinner on the anniversary of death.
Now, it's still unclear whether this cruel form of entertainment actually existed. But at that time, his famous contemporaries, such as historian and linguist Ahmet Baytursunulu and prominent civic leader Ali Khan Bokeh, defended the artist.
Later, Alkay Margolan, the famous Orientalist and archaeologist, confirmed the existence of this game. To be quite honest, it was not the girls who played Tuya Shishu, but most likely the poor widows or slaves who were numerous in the steppe ravaged by war. But let's go back to traditions of family and marriage. There is a perception that it wasn't easy being daughters-in-law in traditional nomadic families. Daughters-in-law had to endure psychological pressure from their mothers-in-law and even beatings of their husbands. After all, a whip hangs on the wall of the yurt for a reason. Ask why there's a whip in the Kazakh house. To punish your wife? No. The whip hangs to scare bad spirits. Demons can't enter the house with the whip on the wall, you know? There are misunderstandings about what it was and what it is today. In Kazakh culture, a daughter-in-law has a special status. She is the keeper of the hearth. She has a special position from the day one. And the attitude towards her is much more reverent and respectful than towards own daughters. Kız bala with the konak. Am I right? The daughter is just a guest in the house. She's to marry off. But the daughter-in-law, she's here to stay. That's why there's a special reverent and respectful, not just reverent, but also respectful attitude to the wives of elder brothers and cousins. That is, the first wife is the head of the house. After all, the home is referred to by the wife's name, not the husband's name. What does this mean? The fact is that she is the keeper of the hearth, yes. So the difference, in many aspects, is significant.
Now, traditionally, marriage in the steppe was not just two people, a couple living together. It was a union between two clans or tribes. And that union was maintained even in the case of a rare divorce or a death of a spouse.
Until the 20th century, people of the steppe practiced leveret, also known as amengerlik. This is one of the oldest forms of marriage, when a widow had to marry one of her brothers-in-law a year after the death of her husband, since the kalim for her had been already paid. And if she wanted to marry another man, then she could not see her children again, and her new husband had to pay a reimbursement to her amenger. There were also reverse situations. When a wife died, the husband could marry the younger sister of his deceased spouse. This was called a sororat marriage. However, the girl's father could refuse the widower, since the sororat rite was not as obligatory as the leveret rite.
Another interesting fact, I could not find a single source that would confirm that nomads had so-called love for sale or working girls. This is also noted by an ethnologist Аксункар Абдулина.
Ну вот насчет наличия, да, женщин легкого поведения, вот в тех источниках, которые...
So about the so-called women of easy love. Well, in the sources I have read, I haven't found any reference to this type of women. In fact, there were none. Well, at least that's my opinion. Maybe if we look at the settled population, they actually had such women.
Седлое население, то там действительно были такие женщины. Вот я читала, да, о нравах женщин Ташкента.
Well, I read about the customs of women in Tashkent. In the 19th century, there were references that they had such comfort women, and there were even good time boys like that. As for the nomadic society, I have not seen any mentions of them in the sources. This is likely because women have always been for the war booty for nomads. In fact, the course of military campaigns, many women were captured. Eventually, they became property of their conquerors. These women became slaves and were used as house slaves.
Они становились рабынями, использовались в качестве домашних рабынь.
It turns out that Kazakhstan didn't have this social vice, but the tradition of polygamy was really widespread. You see, different wars and battles took a lot of men's lives, so there was just not enough of them. Plus, more wives would mean more children. Our expert tells us that there were other reasons why people would have more than one spouse.
Любовь мужчины, она циклична, то есть чувства вспыхивают, и через 10 лет мужчина заряжен на изменения. Мужчина заряжен на освоение нового. Всегда.
A man's love is cyclical. That is, a feeling breaks out, but after 10 years, a man is ready for changes. Men are always ready to learn something new, especially nomadic men. It's natural for them to go beyond the horizon, to the west of the sun, to explore further. A nomadic Jigit who is attached to a single home, this is nonsense. Naturally, a woman or a girl, by heaven or by the laws of nature, she's originally predetermined to keep the hearth. She's the keeper of traditions. She remembers this. She keeps this hearth lit and passes from generation to generation. And this is her purpose. This is very important to understand. Therefore, let's say all family law is built on this principle. There's a saying that people don't like to mention.
Байден өзі тоқалдыки, байден малы, байбишеники. То есть тело бая.
That is, the body of the husband belongs to the second wife, to the younger wife. But all the husband's cattle are managed by the eldest wife.
И это очень правильно. То есть вот происходит первая любовь.
That is, first love happens, yes. First love is baibische. Family and everything. It's great, children are born. But after a decade, feelings cool down and the woman has other worries. So it's the time for the second wife, tokal.
Другие заботы. И вторая жена, токал, да?
The husband has a new flame, a new love. This is how it normally happens. Soon, if the husband could afford it, another yurt, Tokal's yurt, would be created next to Baibishe's yurt. Traditionally, its right side was male and the left side was female. Tosek, the marital bed, was placed on the male side and women tried not to go there during the day. The bed was covered with a curtain called shamoldik. The consummation of nomadic love happened behind this curtain.
Мы давайте не будем забывать, что казахская кочевая культура традиционная – это тенгрианская культура.
Keep in mind that Kazakh nomad culture is traditionally a Tengrian culture based on harmony with nature.
Приводить нужно.
In other words, we need to put our life, a middle world, in harmony with the laws of heaven, that is, with the laws of nature.
То есть законами природы.
Today, we've only scratched the surface of this delicate and eternal subject of love. It seems to me that Kazakh people have very interesting, and I may even say unique, customs and traditions when it comes to family and marital relationships. It was Daniel Besedin and Searching for Mystery. I'll see you next time.